Hear with me the word of the Lord from Psalm 129. They've kicked me around ever since I was young. This is how Israel tells it. They've kicked me around ever since I was young, but they could never keep me down. Their plowmen plowed long furrows up and down my back. Then God ripped the harnesses of the evil plowmen to shreds. Oh, let all those who hate Zion grovel in humiliation. Let them be like grass in shallow ground that withers before the harvest, before the farmhands can gather it in. The harvesters get in the crop before the neighbors have a chance to call out, "Congratulations on your wonderful crop. We bless you in God's name." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The walk of faith is long. Some weeks it feels longer than others as we try to live out these fruits of the Spirit under more pressure or pain than we're used to. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised that as we reach this 10th sermon in our 15-sermon series on the Psalms of Ascent, the psalmist voices something we don't often connect with the life of faith: complaint. They've kicked me around since I was young. They plowed long furrows up and down my back. As we reach Psalm 128, the psalmist's long simmering resentments are finally brought to the surface. Maybe at the beginning, he felt well rested and ready for a walk to the temple that would end in authentic worship of the Lord. And halfway through the journey, he could quiet those voices in the back of his mind saying, "Shouldn't we be there already?" But now he's 2/3 of the way through this journey, and all his complaints begin to boil over in this rush of exclamation. And that raw honesty, well, it leaves me wondering how many of you feel free to complain in this place. Not about the carpet, or the song choices, or the length of the sermon, but about the real problems that you're facing. I wonder how many of you feel the need to cover up your pain, or to hide behind a smile, saying, "Surely others have it worse, or everything will be okay." And I wonder how many of you feel disconnected from yourself or your neighbors or your God because you were taught to push down anything that doesn't look Christian. This morning, I wonder how many of you envy the psalmist's freedom as he pours out his frustrations before the Lord, because so many of us struggle with this kind of lament. And I guess my hope is that this community, these people in this space, can offer you the chance to face the full range of your God-given emotions, especially after the week we all just had. Because the good news of Psalm 128 is that an honest expression of our pain is not a failure of faith. It's an act of hope. We worry that if we confront some of those deeper feelings, we'll find ourselves paralyzed by the weight of our sufferings, frozen in place, unable to move on. But that's not what happens to the psalmist. There is no denial of reality in his song, but acknowledging the difficulties he's faced doesn't end his singing. It only changes his key. And that's not because he's unusually strong or particularly persistent. It's because God is particularly faithful. And he meets us in those honest confessions of anger, sorrow, or fear again and again and again, with this offer of help and transformation. So we shouldn't be shocked when the psalmist's complaint eventually turns to praise. He says, they've kicked me around ever since I was young, but they never could keep me down. Their plowmen plowed long furrows up and down my back. Then God ripped the harnesses of the evil plowmen to shreds. The image that we're given is a person lying with their back exposed while someone cuts deep into their skin back and forth like a farmer working in the field. We're left to imagine one experience of pain after another as these tiny teams of oxen pull their blades across the psalmist's body, but then the harnesses connecting those sharpened tools to the animals that carry them forward are suddenly destroyed. And now, even if their efforts were doubled, the people wielding those weapons could not cause more pain. They could march back and forth all they want, but they can only scratch the surface because somewhere along the way, even as the psalmist voiced his complaint, God took away their power, and he insulated the psalmist from any further suffering. And that is a wonderful, albeit graphic, image of what God does for us if we continue on this journey of discipleship. He does not stop every bad actor, nor does he keep us in bubbles of safety where all of our challenges are gone. But he does give us the ability to persevere by cutting the cords that would allow others to burrow into our sense of self or our ability to hope. Because when we take this walk of faith, we are constantly reminded that we are his. And no amount of pain, persecution, or fear can do anything to take us from his hands. When Jesus sends out the 12, he says, "Don't be afraid. They can kill your body, but they cannot kill your soul. The only one you should fear is God." Because even if the road ahead is hard, we know it ends in redemption and resurrection. So our enemies, whatever they may look like, can continue their attempts to harm us, and they may cause us pain, but they will not break us, because we belong to the Almighty, who cuts the cords of every kind of evil so that even when suffering surrounds us, it cannot burrow into our souls, and it cannot make us less than we actually are. Psalm 128 is a psalm of perseverance, because it's a reminder that when outside forces conspire against us, we can continue in faith, knowing that our God will outlast them all. So there will be moments where our lives bring more trouble than we can reasonably handle. But if we can continue in the way of the Lord, no power of hell will be able to stop us, because no enemy or calamity can change the fundamental reality that our God is for us and he will never abandon his children. I think there's a version of this sermon where we end the reading right here, ignore the rest of the psalm, and go home happy. But the scriptures are more honest than we are. So after this wonderful acknowledgement of God's sovereign grace, the psalm keeps going, and it suddenly veers way off course. The psalmist ends his song saying, "Let all those who hate Zion grovel in humiliation. Let them be like grass in shallow ground that withers before the harvest." And we usually skip right past that because it doesn't seem spiritual or sympathetic. It doesn't seek understanding or love of enemies. It's pure vitriol from someone who is fed up with the sting of sin, and it seems to circle right back to where this psalm began. But if we have ears to hear it, well, this too can be grace abounding, because it's a reminder that grief doesn't operate on our timeline, And it won't be dealt with overnight. We may have to circle through these feelings a whole bunch of times before we end up somewhere good. We may have to forgive or grieve again and again before it finally sticks. But we have the freedom to do that because the psalmist did it too. And we know our God is patient as we work through our pain. So don't be in a hurry to move past the events of this week, and be patient with yourself in every season of pain or grief you experience. When that voice in your head says, shouldn't I be over this? Shouldn't I be further along? Why am I still so bothered? Or don't others have it worse? Don't allow your inner critic to turn you away from honesty or prayer. Because sometimes life is hard, and persevering isn't easy. But if we continue carrying our grief before the Lord with honesty and humility, this circle of complaint and praise will only cause our endurance to grow stronger. And in the end, we will become the kind of people who are sure of God's faithfulness in every circumstance, because we've gone to Him in our times of distress, and we've seen Him arrive against every evil and all the powers of hell to bring us back to praise. It's normal to grow tired on this long walk of faith because storms will come and persecution will happen. But if we keep going, God will not allow us to be overtaken, and we will be transformed. So when everything is going wrong, keep returning to the Lord and keep trusting. And when all of your pain spills over in lament or complaint, be patient with yourself. Be patient with the people around you, and don't be afraid to bring those feelings into this place of worship or to the one who can understand your cries and transform them into something good. Because you're not going to grieve perfectly. And when life hits hard, well, you won't recover quickly. But as Paul says to the church in Rome, when we carry our pains into the presence of Jesus, suffering produces perseverance, perseverance leads to character, and character leads to hope. And when our hope is grounded in the secure love of God and the perfect work of Jesus, Psalm 128 reminds us that it will never fail. They've kicked me around ever since I was young, but they never could keep me down. Their plowmen plowed long furrows up and down my back. Then God ripped the harnesses of the evil plowmen to shreds. Amen.